All right, let's try and unpack that now and make some sense of where we are exactly on this. Political analyst and on-the-spot host. It's Lukhona Mnguni joining us this evening. And heavens, if you can make sense of actually how we got here, then well done to you. So I think let's not overcomplicate the situation. Lukhona, hello to you as well. Between all the backwards and forwards of going to court, what did you make of this when you saw the breaking news?
Well, a good evening, Gareth, and a good evening to our eNCA viewers. Look, it was always going to be a tall order to say that, the Constitutional Court, well, some people might have been hoping that at least the Constitutional Court would give a case management timeline, and therefore you are able to present yourself to the court hears you out, and at least that continues to buy time. Much of this has been a time-buying exercise. However, I know that, Gareth, the person who had to make the decision, and it was just before he left the Correctional Services, was then National Commissioner Arthur Fraser. But I don't think the government itself protested. The minister did not protest much. And certainly the governing party did not protest much, because he actually gave them a way out of what was an easier route. There's no doubt that the incarceration or continued incarceration of President Jacob Zuma, former President Jacob Zuma, visits the African National Congress as a governing party, and therefore the government, with difficult decisions. And again, we are yet in another July, 2 Julys away from 2021. And we are wondering, what does this moment mean politically? Because it's one thing what it means legal. It's another how then the legal, outcome is utilized within the political fray, the political landscape, and the political considerations, which even back then was the core problem, Gareth. This is a highly politically charged case where a president or former president had never been imagined, at least in the South African context, that they would be arrested, imprisoned, and actually made to serve a prison sentence. It was actually an eye-opening thing. And again, I think if we were to say what brought us to this moment, is because I think since he left office, former President Jacob Zuma has just relied on terrible advisors, people who have their own motives for surrounding him. They don't have the strategic nuance on how to help him get through certain things. I mean, him walking out of the Zondo Commission was a terrible thing. He could have just been like Dudumieni, who then kept on saying, sorry, Chairperson, I cannot answer that for fear of incriminating myself. But he would have presented himself and not agitated the commission to the point of holding him accountable and taking him to court. So partly we are here because of a strategic blunder, strategic failure, but also that I think the former president has become vulnerable. He's not as strong and probably as sharp as he used to be as his own trusted political strategist. Therefore, he has to rely on certain people and hear them, and some of them continue to leave him, and he's out in the cold by himself, Gareth.
Let's just talk about why a court case like this is important, because there was at least an inkling, a suggestion, a strong suggestion that the July unrest that you're referring to of 2 years ago had a little bit of something to do with the fact that the former president was incarcerated. There was that element, there was that suggestion that that violence we saw in KZN was sparked partly because of this incarceration. How worried should we be as a country that something like that could happen again? I don't want to go down the road of possibilities and rumors, but it was a concern then. Surely it must be a concern now.
Well, at least for me, it is a concern. I don't know about other people. I remember here on eNCA, we flighted a documentary done by Mpola Kaje. And I said in that documentary that this was a classic case of ANC politics spilling over to society, and that the ANC has actually become a material danger to the South African society because its politics, and that's because the tentacles of the ANC are so vast and they are so entrenched in the South African fabric that anything that spills over outside of the party and into society is likely to adversely affect the society itself. And therefore, it's quite clear to me that as the ConCourt gave this determination, I mean, really, this is just, it's not even a judgment. This is just the court saying there's no reason for us to hear your case because we think what the Supreme Court of Appeals had to say is intact, and there's no prospect for you to succeed in any appeal. So that's what the court was saying. And it's important, Gareth, to highlight the fact that this appeal was not spearheaded by former President Jacob Zuma himself. This appeal was spearheaded by correctional services themselves. Therefore, the executive arm of the state, which the Supreme Court of Appeals then said it is that arm that must then decide whether or not the time spent by the former president outside of prison is contributory to the time he would have spent in prison for him to then qualify for consideration for parole. So I am worried about what this moment means politically. And it's not because automatically the court must play into politics. The politics are separate from the courts, but the political actors will always procure developments in the legal fraternity and in the judiciary to then make their political statements. As you have already seen some political parties coming out on another statement which had to do with the suspension of the then public protector, Busiswe Mkhwebane, rejecting the judgment of the Constitutional Court. Now, you can't reject the judgment of a Constitutional Court. You can disagree with it, but that's your apex court. You can't, there's nowhere else to go beyond that, at least in the most ordinary terms. And therefore, Gareth, what worries me about this moment is I will be watching over the next day or two to say which political actors are picking up on this development from the ConCourt. What is their messaging? What are they agitating society towards? But the political landscape and the political terrain, both within the ANC and outside the ANC, has somewhat fundamentally shifted in the last 2 years.
Yeah, it certainly has as well. And let us not forget that everything that we're discussing when it comes to politics, political players, agitators, whatever it is, to my mind, Lukhona, I'm sure you may or may not agree, you can tell me, is framed within the elections of 2024. We are much closer than I think we realize. Everything is within that political and electoral context. Lukhona Mnguni, political analyst and host of On the Spot. Imagine that show this weekend. Do not miss that here on eNCA.